I'm Frank Menolascino, professor of psychiatry and pediatrics at the University of Nebraska College of Medicine, and also president of the National Association for Retired Citizens. We're about to see a film entitled Out of the Darkness. It's a documentary which actually was accomplished in 1967. At that time, retired citizens and their parents of our great state had very few alternatives except the Beatrice State Home. The film you're about to see documents the rather tragic conditions that were present there as far as poor physical conditions, very little interest and concern for these individuals as human beings, and also the profound lack of opportunities they had for growth and development. Since 1967, the citizens of Nebraska have actually pushed a very strong program of community-based programs. And the approach has been actually not only of concern and interest, but actual programs that serve retired citizens near where they live. Since that time, then, we've come a long, long way out of the darkness. The film itself depicts the situation in 1967. Since that time, 10 years, much has happened. We will discuss after the film you're about to see with two of my colleagues what's been done and indeed the challenges that lie ahead.
Some of the worst conditions exist in K Building, where 257 severely and profoundly retarded adult males are kept. There are 6 dormitories in the building, and the overcrowding is extreme. Beds are packed so closely together that there is virtually no room to walk between them, forcing some of the residents to literally crawl in over the foot of the bed. The severely retarded spend only their sleeping hours in the dormitories. Their waking ones are spent sitting in the corridors or outdoors. Some are shackled or kept in straitjackets for a variety of reasons. Others are not considered dangerous and violent and are allowed to roam about. There are no programs for vocational or social adjustment for these men. The only things to occupy their minds are an occasional television set, a few children's blocks, and the design on the terrazzo floor to be stared at or have a lazy finger follow the path of the intricate design. There is no day room in K Building. The hallways lined with hard wooden benches are used for that purpose. The residents themselves are grouped in a loose conglomeration of apparent mental age. They have no personal possession. 138 severely and profoundly retarded females live in C Building. They outwardly seemingly fare a little better than the men. Their dormitories are cleaner, neater, and not quite as crowded. Most of the patients here, ranging from 6 to 48 years old, spend their waking hours outdoors or in a recreation room, wandering about aimlessly, staring at the walls or the ceiling or at each other. Virtually the only stimulating thing there is a television set. And when it's turned on, there is a rush to witness the wonders of a picture and sound flying through the air, giving them something to do, to enjoy, and taking them for a brief time from the limbo of bedlam. In one dormitory, a woman was shackled to the foot of her bed. When Channel 7's camera was focused on her, she was released. In another dorm, a woman in a straitjacket was left lying on her bed with her head hanging down between the bars. There was no attempt made to move her. The striking thing in this building is the lack of privacy. Toilet facilities, for example, are always open to the gaze of any passerby, even when in use. There are no partitions between the stools, and the doors are always open. Semi-nudity is not uncommon, and some of the adults and juveniles are kept in diapers. In a few cases, this is necessary. In many others, however, the patients have never been toilet trained. Dr. Wolfensberger, a psychologist, comments.
This is a common problem, and it probably has its origin in the attitudes of the personnel. And one often finds that personnel suffer, really, if one can use this word, from views either that the resident, the retarded person at Beatrice is not quite human. In that case, you can view them as animals and you keep them as animals physically. Or if you do view them as human, you do not view them as being citizens, that have rights as other citizens do, and you do not accord them the dignity and respect that you would accord to your fellow citizens. Well, finally, and this is a very common view that was detected by most of the committee members, and that is that the retarded person is not capable of learning or changing or adapting. And of course, this is nonsense. These individuals have a great deal of adaptive ability. They can learn much, they can be taught much, but you must believe that you can teach this, that they can learn it, and you must invest in this teaching effort.
Some of the other especially bad condition are in R, S, and W buildings. They were built in the late 1800s and presently house the higher functional residents at Beatrice. They actually work for the institution, performing tasks in the wards, infirmary, dairy, kitchen, laundry, and on the grounds. For this, they are paid sums from $2 to $15 a month. The buildings themselves are badly dilapidated, dark, and overcrowded. Several years ago, the state fire marshal declared them to be fire traps and unfit for habitation. Yet they are still being used. The superintendent of Beatrice, M.E. Wyatt, was asked about them.
The Board of Control did put in fire sprinkling systems, but we still have the buildings. Now, I understand there's a report coming out as a result of architectural studies carried on through the Department of Institutions, which will bring us up to date on just what buildings are sound and those that are not considered safe. In this area, that these three buildings have all healthy male patients in them, and they're ambulatory and can move real fast and get around.
Twin buildings, F and L, house the higher functional boys and girls between 10 and 16 years old. Their dormitories are a little better. The beds are well spaced, and in some wards, partitions have been erected to divide the area into 2- and 4-bed cubicles. There are also nightstands in which a few small articles can be left. However, they cannot be locked, and patients are forced to keep their treasured belongings, such as old letters and greeting cards, tucked in their shirts. The day rooms for these youths are also a little better than most others. There are some padded chairs and sofas instead of wooden benches, and some activity stimulators such as television sets and pool tables. In one ward, there is a jukebox donated by the father of one of the boys. Some of these things are good. They are a step in the right direction. Many steps, however, are needed to change the pattern of institutionalization, which leads to warehousing the retarded rather than training those who are capable for their return to society as productive citizens. If there is one thing that stands out above all others at an institution, it is the patient's need for recognition and attention. Their physical needs are met, but little else is done to stimulate them mentally. They show their need in many ways. They tug at your shirt and touch your arm in hopes you'll notice them, just one little glance at least. They smile and talk to you, almost begging for one word, and hopefully that smile. Give them the response they seek, and they bubble with delight. You become a friend, and this gives meaning to their existence. Experts say this is an expression of their need for stimulation, and at the same time their frustration. It is a need that the ward attendants and nurses are not able to fill, and there are few visitors. Some residents have never even received a Christmas or birthday card. Those who are more fortunate cherish such treasures for years. They are, in brief, physically healthy, but emotionally starved. With one ward attendant to care for 40 to 50 residents, there is little time for other than filling the basic needs. Concern for the individual, stimulation, and personal attention rate as secondary in importance when the whole problem is being faced. The dehumanizing aspects of such institutions are both apparent and subtle. There are the overcrowding, the lack of privacy, the lack of personal possessions, the drab atmosphere, and many others. Above all these, however, the individual is ignored. He is a part of a meaningless society and trapped in the unchanging confines of life in an institution. He has been, in many instances, abandoned by his family, rejected by his community, and no real effort is being expended to help him return to the outside world as a productive citizen. As a result, his life is without real hope.
The behavior of many people is determined by what we expect of them. We define a role for them, and people will tend to live up to this role. Now, when you put a tin cup and a tin plate and a spoon in front of a person, you're telling this person something. You're telling them that they're incapable of taking care of dishware, of something that might break. You tell them that you expect them to act like animals and to throw things. You tell them you don't expect them to learn to use a fork or a knife, so they don't learn, and they will fulfill your expectations.
One of the showplaces of Beatrice is the institution's new medical surgical rehabilitation building. Conditions here are in sharp contrast to the dark, crowded, and dirty conditions in some wards. One of its finest sections is the dental clinic. Here, 3 dentists and their assistants see and treat an average of 50 to 90 residents a day. The facility is completely self-sustaining and even contains a fully equipped dental surgery unit. In the physical therapy department, a male attendant and several aides work with the handicapped. There is a wide variety of equipment for improving muscular condition and for teaching coordination. Despite the new equipment and facilities, however, the institution has thus far been unable to hire a much-needed trained physical therapist. As a result, the programs do not always meet the needs of the patients. The pediatrics department is bright, cheery, and has many more nurses and aides to care for the children. There is also an abundance of toys for the children to play with. Despite the new surroundings, the ultra-modern equipment, and a more realistic staff-to-patients ratio, the hospital at the Beatrice home, in a sense, also fails. In its design and concept, everything possible is provided to cure the physical ills of the patient, but little is done to stimulate the mental development of the retarded. Children are put into a crawl room filled with toys, but there is no one to show them how to play, or, for that matter, even how to crawl. And thus a bright, shiny toy is like a distant, distracting mirage, unobtainable, unreal. Dr. Wolfensberger was asked if all the retarded can learn.
Indeed, and this is not merely conjecture or theory, this is well-established fact. Even the severely retarded have a much greater learning potential than has been realized for many years. A few years ago, they did a survey in New York City, and even among a group of so-called mongoloid individuals, Down syndrome persons, they found that 5% of those who lived in the community held jobs in the city in relatively competitive situations. And these are people who at one time were believed to be totally incapable of learning anything. People with perhaps less than a third or a quarter of the mentality of an average person.
One of the most depressing sights is in the infirmary. In one of the 2 wards, there are 56 patients ranging from 4 to 62 years old. In addition to being profoundly or severely retarded, these people are crippled and deformed. For them, there can be little more than compassion, understanding, and lifelong care. There is no hope that they could ever become productive citizens. But much of this need not have been a fact. According to some doctors, part of this crippling could have been avoided. With proper stimulation, therapy, and training, many of them could have broken the chain of dependency which binds them to a life in the infirmary. They could have learned to crawl, to walk, or care for themselves to a degree. Muscles would not have wasted away, and their limbs would not have locked, if someone would have had the time and the willingness to help them. It is only with this realization that the true waste of Nebraska's warehousing becomes evident. Some efforts are made to educate the retarded. About 400 of the 2,200 residents receive elementary education or vocational training of one type or another during the regular school year.
One kitten and play with me. Come. These aren't big kittens. They're what kind of kittens? Little kittens. Right.
W.F. Kohler, the Director of Education, explains the program.
During the fall and winter, we have the regular educational programs involving the use of academic skills up to the level that the youngsters are able to profit from. We, of course, try to gear all of our programs to the rate at which these youngsters will learn. This has to be a reduced program. This is a special education program. But many of them are able to learn to read and write up to about the 4th or 5th grade level.
During the summer, the regular education classes are sharply curtailed and are changed to stress recreation, vocations, and hobbies. Combined, all of these programs reach about 18% of the residents at Beatrice. Yet less than half of these people are severely or profoundly retarded, and even they, according to some psychologists, could benefit from such training. The major shortcoming of education at Beatrice is the institution is operating with badly outmoded facilities, equipment, and teaching methods. Texts discarded from public schools long ago are their class books today, and there are no workshops to teach the job skills needed in the outside world. Education that is not interesting and not stimulating cannot help but fail to motivate, and without motivation, there is no reason to learn. The problems of overcrowding and understaffing are closely intertwined with such warehousing. In fact, they cannot really be separated. Emmy Wyant, superintendent of the home, says there are about 700 too many residents at Beatrice, while the Governor's Commission figures about the number to be twice that estimate of 1,400. On top of this, there is still a waiting list of another 130 persons. Wyant estimates an additional 1,000 aides would have to be added in order to meet recommended minimum standards for the existing number of patients. There are, however, problems in finding people to work in the institution. At present, there are 780 people working for the home. This includes a number of college students who are helping out part-time during the summer in a wide variety of programs. Salary scales for the staff are at best very minimal. A typical male ward attendant can expect to earn $242 a month. In addition to the difficulty of hiring staff members, there is also the problem of keeping them. Dr. Wolfensberger, who has toured many of the major institutions in the United States, explains.
Many who are good people simply cannot make the compromises necessary that one has to in such a situation. They do not want to compromise their principles, and they move on. They perhaps go to universities. This often happens, that better personnel from institutions move on to universities. If they stay, they may not be the best people. Often they have problems, and it's a well-known fact that in this country, much of the professional personnel institutions are individuals who might have some difficulties if they held positions in the community.
Are you saying that some of these people who are treating our mentally retarded are actually themselves sick mentally?
Well, let us say that many of them have problems. Some of them may have difficulty with the language. I'm not speaking about Beatrice specifically here, but this is a common phenomenon across the country in institutions. There may be individuals who have difficulty with English, or they may be addicted to drugs or alcohol. They may have emotional problems. They may have such problems in their own close families, which would make it difficult for them to practice in the community.
This is not to say that all of the employees in our state institutions for the retarded are bad. Many are undoubtedly dedicated people who work at a high degree of professional excellence, despite the grueling workload and low pay scale. And they are to be praised. They and the volunteer families from Beatrice who display their love for their fellow man by such things as taking a retarded person to church with them. These are a godsend. One family from a small Nebraska town told this reporter that for the first time their little retarded child is going to Sunday school. They had made attempts in their own town to take the child on Sundays to study about God and Christian living. But the other children, the normal ones, laughed at the retarded boy and made fun of him. And thus he had to retreat from his Christian atmosphere and stay at home on Sundays. But now at Beatrice, the home takes him to Sunday school. And he now learns about God, and nobody laughs. The governor's report has opened the door to life at homes like this for public knowledge, understanding, and awareness. It has criticized the dehumanization of the retarded as a black page in the state's history, and it has recommended changes in the state's concept of handling these unfortunates. These changes cover many aspects, including the establishment of regional service centers and the returning of the retarded to their own home communities for treatment. The cost of such a program has been estimated at $37.5 million for the next 12 years. While the price tag may seem high, the need for change is evident. Whether or not it will be carried out is up to the legislature. Those lawmakers alone have the power to change the necessary laws and to provide the necessary appropriations. There is also another problem at such institutions, one that can be changed without costing the taxpayers a nickel.
I've seen an institution that spends $20 a day per resident, and I've seen an institution that spends $3 a day per resident. And these are just about the highest and lowest figures in this country. And the one who spent $20 a day didn't do any more than the one who spent $3 a day, because they lacked the attitudes, and all the money did not help them. And I hope that in this state that we will not only pay attention to the money needs of these programs that we do need, but the people who will be involved in their minds. And until the attitudes change, and until the attitudes in a good part of the staff of Beatrice change, all the money in the world is not going to make a good institution out of Beatrice.
This was exemplified by one of the staff members as he watched a small retarded boy playing and commented, "Isn't he cute? I wish I had a peanut to throw to him." We might mention that he is no longer working at the home. In our so-called enlightened society, attitudes such as this have no place, especially in the minds of people given the responsibility of treating the mentally retarded. These unfortunates should not be looked down upon, for the lives they live are not by choice, but by chance. The finger of misfortune could have been pointed at any one of us. For some, it was a twisted quirk of fate, such as the presence of one extra chromosome in their cells. And for others, it was a mishap that resulted in irreparable brain damage. Nor are they to be pitied, for they do not seek that. Instead, they ask only for understanding of their plight and the opportunity to develop their fullest potential, so that someday they may have the opportunity to rejoin society as productive citizens and come out of the darkness.
The film Out of the Darkness you've just seen depicts how conditions were for the mentally retarded citizens of our state in 1967. To discuss what's happened since that time are two of my colleagues. To my immediate right, Mr. Tom Miller, Executive Director of the Greater Omaha Association for Retarded Citizens. To my far right, Mr. Dave Powell, Executive Director of the Nebraska Association for Retarded Citizens. The three of us want to discuss what's happened in the decades since the film you just saw. And indeed, a great deal has happened. As I mentioned earlier, there's been the evolution of community-based programs for our mentally retarded citizens. Programs that indeed give an alternative to parents that are retarded to actually how can they help their child or young adult to develop to his most maximal level. Now, to Beatrice State Home, improvement has also occurred in this last decade. The population, which at the time of the film you just saw, Out of the Darkness, was 2,440 human beings there. This time, there are 930 there. Also, the programs have improved as far as nature of the program, quality of the program. However, a recent consent decree was signed by the governor of Nebraska, which is actually a statement that, yes, there's much more that has to be done. In regards to still too many retarded citizens there. Secondly, the programming is not as full as it must be. And thirdly, there's a great deal of restrictions to the rights, indeed, the freedom of the retarded citizens to Beatrice State Home. Those are some of the challenges that have been met in regards to Beatrice State Home. Now, institutions themselves do seem to have some inherent drawbacks. Perhaps, Tom, I'd like to kind of discuss this as an opener in this regards.
What we see happening within an institutional model is the fact that a lot of people are congregated together in one setting. When this occurs, there's automatically some things that are going to happen to citizens who are congregated within this kind of a setting. First of all, we see that privacy is at a real premium within an institutional model. Anytime you have a lot of people living together, the amount of individualization that's going to occur within that setting is going to be at a minimum. So privacy suffers anytime a large number of people live together. Another thing that occurs is that there is the tendency for a large number of people within one setting to come within themselves, to actually draw within and stay apart from the world outside. It's very easy when you have 20, 30, several hundred people in one setting to ignore the world that's happening outside of that institutional wall. So you have an inbreeding of a culture, actually, that occurs within a large congregate setting of people. No matter how you get around it, individuals within an institution are going to have most of their needs met within that institution, are not going to freely mix and mingle with the population at large. Because of that, you're going to have some behavioral problems that are going to occur. We learn from interacting with each other. In an institutional model, you have retarded citizens interacting most of their lives with other retarded citizens. They don't have the opportunity to mix and mingle with their friends, families, non-handicapped persons. So you're going to have set up and established a model whereby behavioral patterns are going to develop. We all mimic each other's behaviors. We've all learned from having an opportunity to mix and mingle with other people, and people of all individual, of various kinds of individuals. And yet in an institutional setting, this opportunity is restricted, severely restricted. So we see these kinds of things happening, and the final line is actually that growth and development is not going to occur as fast within an institutional setting. The feeling of security and comfort with people who are non-handicapped isn't going to develop. So you're going to have a person who is literally going to feel comfortable within that institutional setting but uncomfortable in the world at large. A person who is going to have to learn what it's like to live in the community, and it's going to be difficult.
You know, Tom, the concept you just outlined have to do in the past, a decade ago, as shown in Out of the Darkness. The program, the Beatrice State Home, is essentially under one roof. Here we sleep, here we eat, here we play, and we go back to sleep. And very little, as you mentioned, contact with the outside world and with the modeling of behavior that we all need as far as expectation. I think the alternative to that, flipping the coin over, is to try to provide in the community what kinds of programs does it take for the retarded citizens to have an opportunity to grow. Dave, you may want to comment on the community-based.
Just to start with, from a very personal point of view, one of the major things that's happened over the past 10 years, parents, people in the community, many of them, not everybody yet, many of them, are beginning to say the institution is not the first answer. The first answer is right here at home, in my family, in the most normal environment possible. And that, in fact, is a right of my son to live there, the institution being farther and farther away. And, in fact, that is happening. For the past 10 years, it's been fantastic in the state of Nebraska, all the way from very complex programs here in Omaha to programs that people didn't believe possible in such exciting hotspots of Nebraska as Hay Springs. Hay Springs, Nebraska, 3 gasoline pumps. They have a number of adult mentally retarded persons living there, living in the community, mixing with the community, working in the community, developing skills and becoming productive citizens. Things are happening. People are becoming wage earners. They're finding jobs. They're taking jobs. Community programs are working to integrate more and more and more each day people into that kind of community life. It's adult all the way on down.
It's really providing them for the retarded citizen whatever they need at different ages throughout life. Early in life, developmental programs, school. Later in life, the vocational training, getting ready for the world of work. Also, as we all grow up, we move away from our folks. Residential settings for these individuals. These are the community-based alternatives. As you spoke, and I know you didn't mean to, but I think we're not being negative about the Hay Springs. One of the most exciting times I've had in my life was 3 years ago. I went to Hay Springs. I've been there since, but 3 years ago. And I expected, as you commented, in a small town to see a small program. Instead, I saw a full program, a very modern program, and a program that was geared for the retarded citizens of that region needed. It's a superb program. I think that spirit's been brought across the state, that here are the services that are needed. We've gone from the ideology and indeed the idealism of 1967 to the reality of 1977. The programs are there throughout our state.
Also, if I could comment on community-based programs, what it provides the consumers and their parents is an opportunity to view the programs at first glance. Years ago, when children were placed wholesale into the state institution, there was very little opportunity for parents to actually view what programs were occurring, to actually view what was happening. Now, local consumer involvement is fantastic. Parents can visit the programs. Parents can see what's happening with their child. They can view it firsthand. They can say, listen, I don't like what's going on here, or I feel there should be more changes with my child in respect to this, or I'm a little bit concerned about the attitudes that you as staff purvey. They can be there, and I think that's one very important part of community-based programs that you can never have within a large setting away from communities.
Parents are involved, and indeed they also help monitor those services. That's some of the problems you have in community-based programs, because they're there in the community. If you're not careful, they can also fall apart. I think a lot of the retired citizens are going to need, yes, the freedom that we spoke of, but also the support and guidance.
A very great deal of support. One of the real advantages that any institution has is that it's a place you can look to. It's a building or a set of buildings. And one of the facets of community-based programs, the most effective community-based program, is the most integrated program into the community. It can get lost there. And in a way, that's good, but we also need to constantly watch it, and that's been part of it too. As parents, our parent organizations, watch what's happening. Keep the pressure on. That's happening in communities. It isn't allowed really to happen in institutions to as great an extent.
I think actually looking at these reality problems and challenges, I've been very pleased the training of young professionals has changed. The training now is for how do we actually work in community-based programs. And so the training in our colleges, also in-service training, has really changed the last decade. People are now talking about the real world of how do you help the retired citizen. Instead of in the old days, and I am getting old, they talk about all the theoretical stuff, which had very little relevance. Does this really impact on helping someone else's life? I think the training has been a great deal as far as attitude change in young professionals, and also equipping them to techniques for helping the retired.
It's been fascinating to watch the university system respond, let me say that, and give them a pat on the back, because you're right. The university system started out describing what a mentally retarded person was, and then with a diploma said, go forth and heal, or something really
sensitive,
something really crazy like that. And now there are more and more practicum experiences, and they're realizing that allied professionals, not just the direct on-hands professionals, but allied professionals need some education, some training, and we are moving forward. We have a ways to go, but we're moving forward there.
And also, I feel what's happening too is, if I could even be more sensitive, in the past, rather than go out and heal, it was go out and institutionalize. That was the attitude that was somewhat pervade, I think, and now no longer is that occurring as in the training sectors. And professionals are viewing those of us who were in the past goddamn social workers as people who can perhaps add something to retarded persons' lives. I think that within my office, I have staff who do not have college degrees and yet are seen as colleagues, are seen as professionals, because what they can offer to parents of handicapped citizens, because what they can offer to handicapped citizens themselves.
The three of us have been very involved in the Association of Retired Citizens, and I guess I'm bragging for all three of us. They've done the most to change the professional attitude that you spoke of in the past. As a physician, I grew up with the idea that the retired were helpless and hopeless. Therefore, as you well pointed out, Tom, you just put them away. There's nothing else you could do. As a public attitude change has come with public education, if you will, by the Association of Retired Citizens, a different expectation has been set in the professional's mind. And more important, the service training is about a whole cadre of people, especially young people, say, hey, there are alternatives. So indeed, the professionals have been retrained. They've had their own retardation in the past.
Exactly.
Now, what about funding challenges? That's always a challenge in regards to the institution or the community-based. The funding challenges seem to be very complex in the community, and I know a lot of parents worry about that too.
It's an annual concern.
An annual concern.
There's no way to avoid it. First, let me say, I've been amazed and pleased at how our state legislature has supported in funding and legislation the establishment of programs over the past 10 years for mentally retarded persons. It's been exciting. But again, I have to say, each year it's a challenge we have to face. Each year we have to go back and justify the programs. In a way, that's healthy, because in a way it keeps programs on their toes. But it's a constant thing that we never can get away from. And again, I go back to the fact I find it easier, and I think most, say, legislators find it easier to support a program like an institution where there are buildings, brick and mortar. Back to the idea of the community services, it's harder to fund even a program that you can't identify and point to and say, that is the community-based service here.
That is the building with our, transcript on the bottom that we built this building here. I think what we've got to do is we've got to try to institutionalize funding for community-based services, as funding for institutions has been institutionalized. And look at what the state has funded for years: institutional models, university systems, large institutions for congregated settings. They funded those large, massive settings. Now suddenly they're asked to fund programs that are dispersed throughout the state, programs that you perhaps cannot drive up to and say, see, this is where the retarded people live, because it's a house with 2 or 3 people. And they've got to learn to institutionalize funding for those programs as they have large institutions in the past.
I agree with both of you, especially Dave. The commitment of our legislature, I can't say enough of what they and creative county commissioners have done in our state, because we learned a great deal by trial and error since 1967. Kinds of programs, how they work, more important, the hard dollars. What does it take to make it really work instead of just being, partway successful? It's an annual crisis, and maybe we've had zero budgeting for the last 10 years. We start new each year, but that's good. It's a hard look at dollars, and these hard dollars, really embellish people's lives. So the budget crisis, at least the figures are out front, looking at what we're getting for the dollar.
You mentioned the trial and error factor, and not just in the area of budget, but across the board. It's a problem, but it's been also one of the most exciting things in working in mental retardation in this area. Mental retardation services in the community are not like they're not an institutionalized program. They're a new program. They're a very dynamic program, and we've made mistakes, but we've gone a heck of a long ways too, and a lot of the fun has been working in that kind of dynamic environment that comes up with new ideas, that develops a model and says, like group homes, says that looks good, and then realizes maybe that isn't as adequate as we think it should be, and develops something else. It's a very exciting system that we have.
And because physical structures aren't built, it's easy to say we can change. Yeah. It's easy to say we've rented, we've leased, we can get out of these leases. But you can't say that when you build your large monolithic structure.
So we're flexible. We're flexible. And I think the excitement you speak of, Dave, is also one of the reasons that, again, thanks to the leadership we've had in the legislature, the concern of citizens, including the ARC movement in the state, we find Nebraska at the forefront of programs for retarded citizens in this country. I find that almost hard to believe sometimes, to be very honest with you. I think our viewer, in seeing Out of the Darkness 10 years ago, finds it very hard how in 10 years so much has been done. I think it's excitement, it's ideology, it's the commitment by trial and error to find ways to embellish the lives of the retarded. We still have a ways to go. Public attitude, also in regards to generic services. How do we integrate retarded citizens into the usual services of the community, and also the rights of the mentally retarded? These seem to be the challenges in the future. Would you two agree?
I feel that one of the things of the future, and some of the things that we're seeing now have happened, but have got to happen much, much more in the future, is involving generic services, involving those agencies and services which have existed for years. The school system is a good example. And we have seen such a drastic change just in the past several years of where the schools are taking up the challenge of serving children, that years past they wouldn't have even thought could enter their doors. That's beautiful. We've got a ways to go, but the legislation, again, thanks to some progressive-looking senators, we do have schools that are serving handicapped citizens. It's got to happen more on other fronts, though, and that's another future direction we've got to look at. It's got to happen in the field of recreational services, in those services that are already offered on an ongoing basis, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, those kind of programs. They've made some commitment to handicapped citizens. Persons who are severely and profoundly handicapped is still challenging to many service agencies. And I feel that we're going to have to be especially on our toes working with, educating, training those people in generic services so they do, in fact, provide services to all persons, even those who are severely and profoundly handicapped.
You know, Tom, when I first got into this work, it was a long time ago. I'm going to be an old man. You talk about integrating the retarded into the public schools. I could never understand, you know, a mother and father saying to me that their son or daughter could not go to school with their brother and sister. I found that very difficult because they're taxpayers, they belong to the school district. Someone puts the label retardation on their forehead, and they're excluded. And it's a terrible type of prejudice. So when we talk about the integration, we've come a long way, a long, long way. They should have a right to go to school with their brother and sister. They're a citizen of our area, whatever that area is. You know what I'm saying? We've come a long way instead of sending them away to the school for the funny kids. Mm-hmm. That's the way it was 15, 20 years ago, 10 years ago. So we've come a ways.
It's fascinating to me that over that long ways, the first issues were fairly large, fairly easily identifiable as either institution. It seemed to be either institution or some sort of option in the community. We've come to the point now where the issues become even more and more subtle, like, can my son be served by the doctor who serves the rest of our family, or does he refuse to serve him simply because he's mentally retarded? The generic service issue. We're also getting into issues, as you mentioned, future issues, present issues, including very subtle questions, at least they seem very subtle, but very major decisions in the area of legal rights. The last 10 years, particularly the first 7, were issues were times in which we made great progress through legislation. We're now getting into areas, you referred to the consent decree, we're now getting into areas where more and more through the courts we're defining issues of rights, something that we haven't really talked about. But one of the things we've realized is that we can not only provide programs, but we must also provide retarded persons with the basic rights they have as citizens. And so more and more over the next few years, I think we'll see finer and finer definition through the courts, through the legal system of rights issues.
Discrimination, we're seeing that happening now with mentally retarded citizens because there are more mentally retarded citizens in the community. And I think in some respects, the laws regarding mentally retarded citizens and where we are regarding the whole area of rights is probably where the civil rights movement was maybe 10 years ago. Okay, we've got some good laws on the books, but not all of them are implemented the way they should be. We need some forward-looking attorneys. We need to educate, that's another area of generic services, educate the whole lawyer field to the rights of handicapped citizens. And I think in 5 to 10 years from now, it's going to be an automatic course for attorneys to study persons who are disabled and to understand that there are rights and laws affecting them that have got to be implemented.
I think the issue of rights can sound kind of highfalutin and distant. You know, the concern in our state today and across this country has been that of, for example, the issue of right to treatment in the least restrictive setting. The first issue is that if you're going to place a person in an institution, the eye of the darkness, what we spoke of the problems in the institution, they have a right to treatment there. So many institutions across this country are not giving that treatment. More important, you know, we have to ask that question, as you're both aware that the right to treatment in the least restrictive setting, in the family, in the community, in the neighborhood school. Why send them away, as we did in the past, quote, to be with their own kind? Their own kind happens to be you, and I. I'm not preaching, I'm sorry, but you know what I mean. This is a concern we have, you know, that we're our brother's helpers. We're not our brother's keepers, we're not the custodians. How do we help them to grow?
If I can make a comment, too, on that, Frank, we've got to get to the point of where funding begins seen as credible and good for homes. Community-based services still take mentally retarded persons away from their home life. And I think one of the areas of future direction I know that we've talked about quite a bit and considered is how can we get funding to the home? Right. You as a parent, right. How can we get funding to you, to your house? How can we make that service to families, believable to the public, accountable to the public, and prevent people from actually having to leave their homes, even to go into a community-based service residential model. And that's a future direction I'd really like to see.
It's a very major part of the issue of right to treatment in the least restrictive setting. Our whole general public mindset has been, if you provide services for somebody, you take them out of some place to place them someplace else, and you fund that someplace else. And we have to completely turn that around, it seems to me, and we can, I think, through legislation, through the courts, to the point of saying, if a services, you start in the home, and see if there's any way in the world to provide that services in the most natural environment.
I couldn't agree more. As a physician, I've thought in the past, you're quite right, a family crisis, Tom. And instead of having that short-term crisis, by helping that family get over that crisis, we've taken the kid out and sent him to a long-term solution in the institution. Well, I've thought many times, if you provided a washer and dryer for that mother who has 2 other children, and varicose veins and a back pain, also some babysitter services, you can help quell that crisis, get that child in some programs in the community. Far cheaper dollar-wise, and far greater as far as the humanism and the love and the intactness of that family. But our solution has been to send them away.
And we've got to work on making that a respectable way to receive services within your home life rather than having to be placed outside. And I guess that's the same problem that exists with people who are elderly, et cetera. As we've always provided the services in another place. You come to us and we'll give you the services if you need them. And I think we've really got to work on setting up mechanisms. That's going to be a tough future road to hoe, I think, to set up those mechanisms so people can receive the services they need within their own home.
It's mechanisms, the dollar signs that go with that. I think of Out of the Darkness, the time the film was made, the cost was $3 a day at Beatrice, and it shows it very clearly. However, I'm afraid 10 years later, though the cost has skyrocketed far above $3 a day, I'm sure there's much more improvement in their rights for freedom, their rights for growth. Maybe start talking more in terms of what is the cost for very complex kinds of programs in the community. And now you see in the institution one particular cost. They take the total budget, divide the number of patients, $10,000, $11,000 as the price comes out. At Beatrice Today, that's what comes out. And I say, a lot of folks don't need $10,000, $11,000 of services. Some need $80 worth, and some might need $18,000 for 1 or 2 years as they grow.
That's exactly where a community-based program can come in and provide that cost-benefit program. If that program is $2 a day to have a staff member come and drop in for an hour to teach a mentally retarded adult how to cook, and that's the only hour that person needs, that can be a $2 a day program or less. And you're right, Frank, if a person needs an $80 a day service, that also can be provided. But what you're also looking at in the community is that eventually that person will need less and less. In an institutional model, you always need $10,000 a year.
That's right.
Whether you really need $10,000 or not, you're getting $10,000 a year, and that's another facet that you have so much more leeway and flexibility in the community programs of being able to provide different dollar amounts of services for the actual needs.
Tax benefit's hard for me to talk about, cost benefit, but in fact we are seeing that, and that is part of the benefit of community services. The whole idea that people not only need less and less in terms of services, but we have shown that people can become job holders, taxpayers, that kind of thing, where before $10,000 a year flat.
Well, I think the flat, of course, meant also oblivion for so many retarded citizens as far as growth. I think today, with public attitude changes, move toward the rights of the retarded as fellow human beings, fellow citizens, I think the concern for making the programs work and the commitment, of people to, hey, it's our job to make it work. It's one of the reasons I think we've come so far. I think of the film 10 years ago. It's pretty grim, pretty grim. We're now saying, that future does not have to be for retarded citizens of our state or any state in this country.
And attitudes are changing, too, because retarded citizens are in the community. It's an interesting phenomenon. A lot of time people say, well, you can't take people out of the institution until the attitude changes. And the attitudes are only going to change when retarded citizens are right there, when they're brushing shoulders with John Q. Henry, or John Q. Citizen, when they're in the stores, when they're in the taking public transportation. That's the only time attitudes are going to change, and change substantially. And I think we've seen that growth of attitude change. It's nowhere near where it should be. There's still so many misconceptions perceptions that most citizens in the street still have towards individuals who are retarded. They still have that picture of the retarded person who's incapable of doing anything. But they're changing, and we're seeing that growth. And what's beautiful, I think, is on the preschool level, for instance, early education programs. Mentally retarded people are finally brushing shoulders with kids 4 or 5 years old. I didn't have that chance to see people who were handicapped when I was 4 or 5. It wasn't until I was in my 20s, sad to say, that I knew people who were handicapped. Now kids 4, 5, 6 years old are having that chance, and that's where it's got to start. And things are going to be much different with those kids who are 4 and 5, who are non-handicapped. Their attitudes are going to be great.
The attitudes of young children, the whole posture of integrating the mentally retarded, I think whatever age, been more appropriate as to what has to be done and what can be done. Rather than the film, we saw all ages sort of, homogenized together out in the wasteland, so to speak. We've come a long way. I want to thank both of you for being with us to discuss Out of the Darkness, 1967, what's happened since 1967, a decade of work, and the future of help and hope for the retarded citizens of our state. Thank you.